Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Captain Marvel. So, I think the one smart thing that Marvel tended to do was instill a fear of you missing out. Immediately going on and forcing you to try and get to a theater to see every single Marvel film to the point where they don't even have to put a good product out. They just have to put something out there to intrigue people enough to just like, maybe I should see this. And then they kind of universe connect everything to have you be like, well, yeah, I definitely should have saw this movie, even though, like, really in the back of my mind, I'm like, So, Captain Marvel, I would have to go on and say that I saw this in the theater, because you technically have to with every single one of these movies. And then I went on and watched this today, and really I was kind of thinking, out of all these superhero movies that I would see, that even the ones that I didn't like all that well, that I would go on and turn around and all of a sudden, like, another viewing would just make me see a movie drastically differently. Where I'm like, you know what, this movie is actually good, but, like, for this one, I would just say that this movie is just, like, it's so flat of a film that I can't exactly go on and be, like, still pleased or worthwhile that I was to go on and see this film. Even at some points where we have, like, us kind of thinking it's like, man, like, we have to make heavy comparisons from this movie to the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern film, and I would just rather go on and watch Green Lantern. I would rather go on and watch that movie, Green Lantern, because it's goofy, but it's a lot of fun, because it's creative, where, like, for Captain Marvel's kind of origin story and whatever, it's not really creative enough. We kind of have this born identity kind of approach to this character, and we just have these kind of snidbits of, like, scenes coming back to Carol, getting these flashes of her past, and really doesn't seem like we definitively have a villain in this story. It's just, like, even when it does seem like there is a villain, like, we don't really marinate on that villain long enough for us to go on and, like, feel that if you kind of take certain scenes out of this movie, you still wouldn't know who the villain is. Like, if we just take one scene out of this whole film, like, it basically is to just say, like, you would never know who the villain really is in this story. Like, you would just go on and be completely confused. But a lot of people would just be like, well, obviously the villain is this character, why don't you get that? Because it's not done well enough. It's not done good enough. Like, I would have liked to have seen, like, the whole entire time these people kind of working behind the scenes, working against Captain Marvel, and they could go on and have, like, consistently gone into flashbacks of a number of different scenarios that were kind of played out throughout the movie, saying that they're consistently questioning Veers here, but that really never happens. So, like, they could go on to a villain's point of view of things, but they just don't. So, we're I guess, just happy to see another character in the MCU, and really, Captain Marvel has just been reserved to be placed into cutscenes of much more recent MCU movies, alongside with Bruce Banner, and, like, that's the shelf life of this character, sadly enough. Like, we've already kind of just were consistently little bits here and there, like, using her, but, like, obviously, like, having another Captain Marvel movie would probably be a mistake. Uh, I don't really even get why they're doing another Ant-Man movie, but, like, they're just gonna keep on churning those bad boys out. Uh, it is what it is. Something's gonna have to be really fascinating about that third Ant-Man to really garner my interest. Because really the Marvel films have just been like, there've been a lot of hard sells. So with that said, so I would have to say that this is just a I would have to say this is a probably bad film. But I want to, like, I don't want to overly just, like, crucially just, like, bad, awful, the worst thing I've ever seen. No, like, I would have to say that this is a bad film, but it's not, like, there have been worse Marvel movies out there. Worse to the point of, like, at least I could go on and I would say that this is a watchable bad Marvel film, and there are some Marvel movies that it's like I never I never again want to see this movie. AKA anything that happens past Days of Future Past for X-Men movies, because I just have no real true interest in watching First Class or anything that is to be tied to that franchise. Even though if someone is to say, but those are the more popular ones, I just, like, I would rather go on to tie myself to an X-Men franchise that I would deem to have enjoyment watching. I don't even want to watch First Class. I just don't. So with that said, let's just go into double five time territory. Let's get into spoilers about Captain Marvel. So the interesting thing about this movie is we have a number of characters that are to go on and be tied into other things. Like the little girl who is Monica in this movie, we go on and see her in WandaVision as Monica Rambeau. And so that little girl that we see in this movie goes on to be a pretty substantial character within WandaVision. I'm not going to spoil it for WandaVision. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I mean. This girl ends up becoming a superhero herself, which, of course, I know who that is. And so, great. Yada, yada. We also have Karath, who's in this movie, because this is a prequel. And Karath, of course, would be in Guardians of the Galaxy. And we also have a number of other characters that are technically from the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie that are tied in here. And I won't spoil anything else for anybody who is to have finally realized that this movie exists and like, oh, should I see this or not? I wouldn't say that this movie is relevant enough, but there is a series called Secret Avenger or Secret Invasion that at some point is probably going to come out, because they're like saying that they're doing like a Nick Fury series where it's Secret Invasion, and so people keep talking about that. So there's a possibility that may come out. So you might be forced to go on and have to watch Captain Marvel if you haven't, because there's probably going to be a lot of tie-ins from this movie possibly into that. I don't know the timeline of Secret Invasion, or even if Secret Invasion is really legitimately going to come out, because there is no trailer about it. But supposedly there is hinting on the fact that there is going to be some Nick Fury series coming somewhere down the pipeline, as well as there is supposedly being an Agents of S.W.O.R.D. show with possibly the mutant beast in it, supposedly. So we'll see about that. I don't know. They toss out so many things that are saying like, oh yeah, this is gonna happen, that's gonna happen, and then it's like, well, is it though? Is it really gonna happen? Is it gonna be all that great and amazing and worth our time? We'll see about that. I just can't wait for Moon Knight. I'm so excited, and I can't wait. It feels like a countdown now to that show, and I hope I'm going to be like so thrilled and excited. So, with that said, let's go into that double five. Let's just go into this thing that is always to be called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time to spoil this movie. But I guess like teeing it up, what is this movie about? We of course have Veers, who is quote unquote Captain Marvel. They don't really go to any much of these names until the very end of this, where Veers doesn't even know she's Carol Danvers for most of this movie because she doesn't even know her past. So Veers goes on and is to not really know who to trust at some point in this movie, which is to have her turn to Nick Fury, who is working with Phil Coulson at this time because this is 1995. And they go on and they talk about a mission that is to happen 6 years ago, and all of a sudden it seems that Veers is to remember bits and pieces about her life, and the more and more she spends time on Terran, aka Earth, she is to start remembering things and starting to realize who she really is. And eventually is to also realize who the real villain of this story actually is. There is also a lot of retconning going on in this movie also. Like, we drastically change who the Supreme Intelligence is. Because if you would go on and Google what the Supreme Intelligence actually looks like, it's basically some big, massive blob of a head. And they kind of retcon what the Supreme Intelligence is with this movie. And I'm like, seriously? So they had to, like, clean up that character for some goofy reason? But then we also turn around and really just say that Captain America, even though they dub him to be the first Avenger, like, he wasn't really the one that was around at that time to make anybody give a about the Avengers. And so, like, all of a sudden Captain Marvel is coming in, and she is to supposedly start off the real Avengers initiative within this movie because of a nickname. Whatever. Just, it is what it is with this movie. Let's go out of our way to go into spoilers. So let's go into spoilers now. So the beginning of this starts on Hala, which is to be the Kree Empire planet. So we have both Veers and we have both Yun Rog, who of course is Jude Law's character, who are training because of course Veers is to not sleep, so she goes and wakes young Rog up to go on and fight. And so young Rog is young Rog is the Obi-Wan to Veers' Anakin. And I know a lot of people may not like that reference, but like really it easily fits that bill. Where we have Veers, who's kind of like this young rash, like, oh, I can beat everybody kind of thing, like, why am I even training now? It's pointless. And young Rog is just like, well, like there is a lot that you need to learn. You need to like channel your emotions, and you need to be able to beat me without using your powers because one day you might not have them, kind of thing. And so Veers goes on and of course is to technically take young Rog down, but she technically uses her powers. So we then transition to have now Veers and Young Rog talking about the Supreme Intelligence on this kind of train that they're on, the Kree train. The Kree train! Woohoo! Anyways, pushing on. So, Veers is asking Young Rog, like, who does he see when he, of course, is to talk to the Supreme Intelligence? And Young Rog is like, well, I can't tell you that. Like, it's a secret. It's a dream. Someday they'll have secrets. Someday they'll have dreams. iRobot for you. So, Veers is trying to guess who it is. It's like, is it me? Is it... is it this? Is it that? Is it... And so, Young Rog is like, I don't think you get what... like, I'm not going to tell you. So, Veers goes on and is to talk to the Supreme Intelligence, and the person of which that she sees, she doesn't even understand who this is. So, because the memory of this person she does not really have quite yet, but eventually her memory will get jogged the further and further along we go into this story. So, Veers, after talking to the Supreme Intelligence, is to then go on and have a mission with the Star Force, which of course is the people that we see on the bottom of the screen here, with the exception of the Skrull. We of course see Minerva, Karath, Atlas, and Bronchar. Sure. Sure. Anyways, so all of the Star Force needs to go on and make their way to a mission on a planet called Torfa. Because there is a guy named, of course, Solar that is stuck there, and I guess he is taken hostage by the Skrull people, or he is to like be the guy who's kind of give these Kree people information and so on and so forth. And so the Star Force goes on and meets with Solar at this planet with the Helion ship. So we of course have it where the guys are talking like the group is kind of cracking wise and whatever going on. So they go on to Torfa, and so Young Rog is kind of giving them like, hey, whatever happens, like let's all kind of meet back onto the ship, the Helion ship. And so they go on and try to meet with Solar, and Veers is to go on and get the code from this guy to know who he is. Because we have Skrulls that are honestly kind of, in this movie, they're kind of nerfed characters. Because really all they can do is just change certain identities to make them look like certain people. And I'm like, man, like, it really would have been great if they would have had the ability of doing a, like, Super Skrull kind of thing, where we could find out that a Skrull, like, can get the same kind of powers as a number of things. Like, that would have been a way better, like, story, but really would have made a lot of sense to, like, have that kind of power, but, like, really looking at it, Skrulls, like, their best thing is just that they can, like, they can look like somebody and, like, woohoo. So, come to find out that Veers is to go and find Solar, and the rest of the Star Force find out that this is an ambush, and every single one of the Kree people are actually Skrull people, and so they're outnumbered here. And so what happens is that the Star Force goes off on their own, scrambles out of there, and Veers ends up getting taken by the Skrull people, and they're manipulating her brain to try to get a certain amount of information from Veers that she has been keeping dormant within her brain that even Veers can't access, but it seems like she's starting to access it now. Because Veers is on this Skrull ship, and she is consistently seeing these flashes of memory, to the point of Veers is seeing herself as a young kid with her father, and Veers is seeing herself in the military, where, of course, she was desperately trying to go from one rope to the other, and she falls. And we have certain people that, of course, are to kind of put her down because of her gender. Like, what a garbage story that is. Where it's like, hey, like, there's a reason why they call it the cockpit, huh? Really? There's a reason why they call people stupid, right? Because that's a stupid part of the story where they have to just go on and, like, that's the only story that they can really tell here. Because, of course, that's the only route that they can go. So, Veers, I guess, has to get motivated throughout her life because there's a lot of people that tell her that she can't do this. And so she has to go on and be the only one who can, because she's like, yeah, like, I definitely have to go on and show everybody that, like if you're gonna bet on somebody, bet on Carol. So Veers is going on and is seeing her co-pilot, who we find out is Dr. Wendy Lawson, and they find out that Wendy Lawson is tied to this project called Pegasus. And so we have at one point where we fast forward to now Carol, who is still Veers in this ship, flying her way, and then she ejects, and the Skrulls are looking for some coordinates, and they're desperately trying to have Veers here focus upon this kind of one coordinate so they can go and find, because they're desperately looking for this light speed engine, which is to also be dubbed to, of course, be a energy core, which is to basically be the equivalent of the Tesseract. And later on in the film, we'll find the Tesseract when we get to this movie later. So we at some point have Veers that is to wake up during this whole dream sequence, and she sees a number of skulls all picking through this girl's brain, trying to find out information. And so that, of course, has Carol decide to use her powers to, of course, blast her way out of this, out of these shackles and out of this kind of thing. But she still has these kind of pieces that are kind of keeping her hands, like, unfree. So we have we have Veers here, that because we still, like, she doesn't really know who she is. So we have Veers here who is blasting her way through all these Skrull guys, and, like, nothing really creative here because, like, her hands are shackled and she can't really do anything really cool and combative and whatever. And that's kind of the true weakness of this character, is we never see anything really cool coming out of combat-wise from this character. There's nothing really unique here. It's not like in Captain America Winter Soldier where we're seeing like Captain America like freaking kick somebody and like the guy goes flying. Like those simple moments in the early stages of Captain America Winter Soldier where Captain America's beating the crap out of everybody on that ship, that was like a brilliant sequel. Just because it's like, man, you could really see how massively powerful Captain America is compared to the first film where it's like he would do some cool things, but he would rely on his shield a lot. Where in like this film, we have Carol just relying on her fist blasting ability a lot, and immediately I'm just like, man, like, what are they going to do with Nova if they ever do a Nova movie that's going to that's going to really be drastically different than Captain Marvel? I just don't see that movie. Like that movie would have to be some kind of mind-blowing piece of work to really be better than this film. And like I would love to see a Nova movie, but I would just immediately be very concerned about how they're going to really put it together. So to not make it just feel like another Captain Marvel movie. So we of course have Veers who escapes from this ship and is to, of course, uh, make her way onto having uh, a ship that gets heavily attacked, where she just kind of falls to Earth and crash lands into this blockbuster video, and all of a sudden we have Danvers, who is to destroy a poster. True Lies. How dare she? Here's one thing. There is to have been this video from Game Grumps where Game Grumps was going on and talking to Jamie Lee Curtis as like a guest grump. And Aaron is to mention that Jamie Lee Curtis is technically in Captain Marvel because like they like mentioned the scene of like her poster getting like busted and whatever, and like they talk about it, but like Jamie Lee Curtis like doesn't go on to like, oh well, I'm honored that they chose me, or like no, because it's just like, oh well, that's great. Like I'm not really in that movie. Like yeah, the poster's there, but like I think that was like a kind of fun little thing, so you can go ahead and like check that out about them like talking about that, because Game Grumps is really cool anyways. So as if like Aaron is to confront Jamie Lee Curtis, well, how do you feel about being in Captain Marvel? Jamie Lee Curtis probably doesn't even watch those films, and I know there's probably just a ton of people that just don't. They just don't like them. They don't like Marvel movies as a whole, and I completely understand that. I think there's some exhaustion going on where a lot of people just want to jump off at some points, and I completely understand that. There's some movies where I just don't want to go on and watch, and I'll just like, I'll watch them later, or I know how well it's not going to be, so I just don't have any real interest, or I just kind of have to watch them anyways because they'll be popular at some point in the distant future. Anyways, pushing on. So Carol is to fall to seemingly what would be her death, but no, she doesn't. And so Veers is to make her way to meet up with the security guard and go on and ask him if there's any place to find any kind of communication device. And the security guard points her to a Radio Shack, because of course Radio Shack is to me now like all done and over with for a number of years, but like in the 90s it's still a existing thing. So they went out of their way to find a number of things that were to still last during that time period, so that way we can have these kind of cool references. But I don't really think that they go out of their way to do them all that enough in this movie. But at least we got something. Like, at least they tried to do some kind of 90s something, because they could have gotten to a point where like nothing could have really been 90s except for them to just say, "Hey guys, it's 1995. Woohoo! Yeah, great." So Veers is to go and makeshift this telephone so that way she can go on and talk to Yun Rog. And so Veers is talking about some memories that she, of course, is to have, and that she feels that somehow she is connected to Earth somehow, and Yun Rog is going on and talking about him talking to the Supreme Intelligence and telling Veers like what he was to learn and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden Nick Fury is to show up and talk to Veers and say it's like, well, hey, it seems that we had gotten a call from a person who was mentioning that there was some girl around here that was set up for laser tag, and like it seems like we just came down here to see what he was talking about. And both Nick Fury and Coulson are there to kind of uh, see Veers and kind of and talk to her. So Veers is kind of telling these guys like who she is, uh, because of course Nick Fury has this identity, and or Nick Fury's to have this kind of like badge and whatever to flash at Veers, and so Fury is asking kind about Veers. It's like, oh well, like where's your identity card? And Veers is like, oh, we don't have those kinds of things. So we consistently go on and have Nick Fury desperately wanting to continue to talk to Veers, because it seems like uh, the more and more they talk, it seems that Veers isn't from here. But all of a sudden, there seems to be this Skrull that tries to attack both Fury and Coulson, and so Veers has attacked them, and then Veers runs off to try to go after this Skrull, and Nick Fury and Coulson are getting into this car, this vehicle, and Nick Fury turns to Coulson and is like, "Hey, did you ever see like her weapon that she had?" And Coulson's like, "Well, what weapon?" So they drive off to chase down where this girl is. So Veers is to go on to this subway station, running this Skrull down, and that leads her to go to this like light rail kind of train. I always get those like things confused. So Veers goes on into this place and is starting to kind of look and try to figure out who the Skrull is. At one point, of course, we have Stan Lee, who is to kind of get his Mallrat script being pushed down. And if a lot of you guys don't know, like Stan Lee was actually in the Kevin Smith film called Mallrats, and he had a little scene in there. And really, I would go on, and I've seen Kevin Smith's YouTube channel, and when Stanley passed away, we like of course Kevin Smith was to go on and do this thing about how like Kevin Smith had worked with Stan Lee, and they had gone on and done that movie together, and it was like a really touching moment. And like it was just like, well, yeah, like it's really cool to have like Stan Lee in a different capacity, like because I know like Stan Lee was always like the narrator for some shows and stuff like that. Like the '90s Spider-Man, you'd have like Stan Lee kind of introducing a lot of the episodes, and like it was always kind of fun to have him like True Believers and Excelsior and all that kind of cool stuff. And of course, in this movie, they do like the thank you Stan and the tribute to him, and it's a really great, like, good feeling movie that they are trying to figure out a way to continue to incorporate Stan Lee one way or the other within these movies or whichever. So Virus goes on and is to make her way through this train, and she ends up finding some old lady, some elderly lady that she figures out is a scroll. They start duking it out, and like this scene kind of feels very reminiscent to like the Spider-Man 2 movie, even though it's kind of weird to say that because it's like two aliens just kind of duking it out, but it just kind of reminds me of Spider-Man 2 weirdly. So they even get to the point of being on top of this light rail and they're just kind of like chasing after one another. But this all leads eventually to them scrambling off to this station, and Veer starts losing track of where this scroll is. But it seems that Veer is to have uh, this piece that this scroll had, and she kind of puts it into uh, her arm, and she tries to get information out of it, but it doesn't quite work, and she has to pull it back out. So, not sure what exactly that was, but there it is. So, after that moment, like, we have Veers not exactly knowing what to do after this. She decides to go and kind of change after what she was wearing to look more like a human being, going and wearing that Nine Inch Nails shirt and biker jacket and flannel tied to her waist, like the traditional 90s person. One thing that I have to say also about the soundtrack of this movie, the soundtrack of this film doesn't make sense for what's really going on. Like, it doesn't feel like any of this music really fits what's going on at any point of this movie, but they're just tossing a lot of 90s hits into this movie, and that's all they give a about. And it really just does not fit for what's going on. Even though a lot of people would disagree with me, like, I just don't think the music really makes sense. And a lot of people would have that same argument with, like, of course, like Guardians of the Galaxy movies or any other thing, but I would just be like, well, like, that music makes a lot more sense than, like, what just, like, hey, let's just infuse 90 hit here. Let's just infuse 90 hit here. And it just doesn't work for a lot of stuff in this film. But anyways, moving on. So, Virus goes on to make it to this bar where she's to have a history with this bar. It seems like she's starting to have flashes of memory of some of the times that she, of course, was to have with a girl named Maria, who, of course, will find out she had worked with in the Air Force. So, uh, so Virus goes on and is to meet up with Nick Fury at this bar, and so now we have to have a moment where Veers is asking Nick Fury, like, well, are you really Nick Fury or are you some kind of Skrull clone? Because, of course, Nick Fury was to be driving off to try to chase after Veers, and he finds out that Coulson, for a moment, was a Skrull because Coulson's actually calling, say that he's still back at that the movie rental place, and he's still checking things out. So Fury is to go on and fight with Skrull Coulson, and at some point, this Skrull via this accident is to die. Fury is to toss this blazer over the Skrull, and is to go in and have him being dissected by his superior kind of looking over it, who is Keller, Fury's superior, and some guy just kind of doing an alien autopsy. So after that moment, we of course have Fury going on and talking to Veers, as Keller was to go on and tell us that he's basically Talos, and he's realizing that one of his alien like friends is to be dead. And he's like, hey, like, this will be worth it at the end of all of it. So, blah, blah, blah. So, Fury Veers. They're talking about, of course, how Fury is to be legitimate Fury, and we find out a little bit more backstory about Fury. But when really looking at it, there's some goofy things that they do in this movie to just tell us, like, oh, like Fury and Coulson will be best friends in the future, and that like they kind of have to like they tease at some points how Fury is to have hurt his eye, and then they reveal how supposedly he hurts his eye at the end of this movie, and I'm just just that is the stupidest way to like iconically like disgrace a character, and just make it a butt of a joke of why this guy is to have the scar of his face that we have seen for a number of films, but hence why nobody really consistently goes out of the way to watch Captain Marvel numerous times over. And if Captain Marvel is your favorite Marvel film, then like there's a lot of people that have like the wildly opposite effect, where the movies that are for most of the point to be not liked, everyone likes. Like some people like the ones that are just like, I'm like, huh? Like that one's their favorite? Okay, doesn't make sense, but like that's your opinion. It's the way you float your boat. So, anyways, so after Veers and Fury are talking, and they decide to go on and have Fury go and take Veers to Project Pegasus, which is to basically be this facility that was code tied together between both NASA and Pegasus, like teamed up together. And so now Fury is to go on and, of course, show paperwork to Veers about Wendy Lawson, and is to showcase that there was this ship called the ASIS aircraft, ASIS aircraft, that 6 years ago had crashed. And all of a sudden we start to have it where we have Veers who's starting to remember all this, starting to recount that event. So Veers is to go on and is to realize that she had worked with Lawson to try and protect this Lightspeed engine, which we actually find out is an energy core. And so we of course have it where Veers is to go on and realize that once she crashes this plane, she finds out that young Rog is to be the villain of this story, and that the Kree people are not who she thought that they were, yada yada yada. Because we find out that young Rog is to, of course, be the mysterious person to go on and try to shoot Veers here, and Veers ends up shooting the energy core, and the energy core ends up going into her, and that's how she ends up getting this power. And so, like, Veers is starting to realize that she can possibly, at some point, seek out the Skrulls as allies. So that'll happen sooner or later here. So, because we have at one point where Fury is talking to Keller, and Fury's realized that Keller isn't who he says he is, and Keller is calling Fury Nicholas, and Fury had just gone on before they went into this facility saying that everyone calls me Fury. Even my own mother calls me Fury. Even my kids will just call me Fury. And so on and so forth. And so they go into this facility, and Fury tosses a baseball cap to give to Fierce so that way she can be wearing this shield cap so it looks like she's part of one of them. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. Like, it's funny, they don't do that to anybody else in the Avengers, whatever things. Like, you don't see Thor with shield merchandise just like, hey man, just rocking the shield sunglasses or the shield cap. Like, what were they trying to do? Were they trying to like merchandise some like shield stuff for a cosplay? And just be like, oh yeah, like this is the Carol Danvers when she's in the facility, and Nine Inch Nails and shield hat, and like maybe somebody cosplayed as that. That would actually be funny. I would like that. Because it would be this funny kind of like, hey, I'm not Captain Marvel. I'm the variation of Fierce or Carol Danvers. So yeah. So Fierce is starting to remember things, and so all of a sudden, while they're making their way through this facility, Nick Fury is all of a sudden meeting up with this cat called Goose. Out of nowhere. There isn't a thing that makes sense of why this cat is just here, but it's here now for whatever goofy reason. And so we end up finding at some point that this cat isn't really a cat. It's actually a Flurkin. Because movie has to be goofy. But we don't find that out just yet. But anyways, so since Nick Fury is to realize that Keller is a Skrull, Keller is to be with Fury, and Fury is to tell him to go to floor 5, while Fury is to go to level 6, where Fury knows that Fierce is down there. And so Keller is to realize that Fury told him to go to the wrong place, and so now Keller is saying that Fury is turned, that all the SHIELD agents have to go on and go up against Fury. I'm like, when has this ever happened before? Because, man, we have so many, I don't know how many times where SHIELD has just been infiltrated by Skrulls, by, spoilers, Hydra, by any number of things. When is it going to be that SHIELD is not infiltrated by somebody? When is that never going to not be a thing? They need to just figure out a way to not get infiltrated, because it happens way too often. So, at one point we have Fury who's fighting with Keller, and Keller is to mention, it's like, well, hey, I don't even really need these glasses to see, but it's just a cosmetic choice. And so Fierce goes on and fights with Talos, who we find out is actually a Skrull. And so Fierce and Fury are to run off, as Coulson is to have a gun on them, but he lies and tells the agent that he's working with, it's like, oh, well, Fury and Fierce aren't down here, so, let's go on and let's go somewhere else. So, both Fierce and Fury are to steal one of these aircrafts and make their way off to finding the only person that can go and tell them exactly what was to go down, And of course, that is Maria Rambeau. And of course, we'll meet up with young Monica, who goes on and is in WandaVision. Isn't that great? A show that I didn't really like. Anyway, man, we're just tying characters into shows that are just like the Marvel. Blah. Anyways, so I just wasn't a fan of WandaVision, and a lot of people love that show and love a bunch of Marvel stuff. I'm just not won over by just not won over. I can't help it. It's just it wasn't something that I was like, man, like this is just like I want to see it because again, you have to watch everything because Marvel does that. DC, you can take it or leave it because like I don't really bother with the whole connection of things. But hopefully Moon Knight can just really be its own thing. Don't muddy the waters with him joining some weird, bizarrish team that makes no sense. Pushing on. So we now have it where Veers is to go on and meet up with Maria, and Maria is consistently trying to jog, of course, now Carol Danvers' memory, because they tell her what her actual name is, and they go on and they tell her like what led up to the day where she had gone missing for 6 years, and so on and so forth. So we have Monica, who has a huge, massive number of pictures of all this stuff supposedly from Carol's past, talking about Halloweens, talking about Christmases, birthdays, yada yada yada, all the boyfriends that she might have had at some point in this movie. So now with that said, we now have Monica that's going outside, and we have at one point that there's a door knock, and Carol is thinking that this is to be Talos, and it ends up just being some neighbor that's like, hey, can we see this aircraft? And they're like, no, like, just go away. So all of a sudden we find out that Talos is, of course, to be Maria, or is to be like somebody else that appears to them. And Talos is like, hey, no more games. I'm going to come as me, and I'm going to tell you guys all the truth. And then we have Maria, who's outside, who's actually another Skrull, playing with Monica. So Talos is to come in there and be like, hey, we need your help. We need to go on and find this base that, of course, Marvel was to have. Marvel is actually Lawson, and Lawson had been disguising herself as Dr. Lawson for the longest time, but she actually was Marvel, and they couldn't figure out where her base was. And so we go on and figure out that this woman's base is actually in Earth's orbit, and Talos to go on and talk to his science person and say, like, wait a minute, like, how is it that we didn't figure that out? Like, how is it we didn't go on and immediately know that's where this base was? So we have it where young Rog is to, of course, make his way to Earth, and is to go and take Talos' science officer, and is to kill him, and is to want also information from him, which is to basically tell us that young Rog is to immediately going to know where Marvel's base is and try to have this big massive fight out at this base. And Young Rog is to mention that the blue blood that is coursing through uh, Captain Marvel's veins is actually his blood, because he was the one to go on and take Carol down, but then I guess they turned around and took her and took her to Yala, where she didn't remember anything. They just kind of trained her as one of theirs. So Yunrog is talking with Ronan and having like this updated discussion with him. So we end up seeing Ronan here, of course, Ronan the Accuser. So, and this time around, it seems like we have a Ronan that is a little bit different than in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, because I guess there's a reason for that, to probably sell action figures or have some kind of merch with a different looking Ronin on it. So it's like, oh, this is the different looking Ronin. Ronin, isn't that great? So, and I guess over the years you have to make this character look a little bit different, so you can have him look younger or whatever. I don't know, is what is with this movie. So we have your, if I can speak English here. Young Rod goes on and shoots his science officer, and the guys go on and are to fix this ship of Danvers to have it be able to now fly into space, so they can go on and find this orbit base. And so once they do go into orbit, finding this base, we of course now find the Tesseract, and I guess we've been figuring out how Lawson was to come up with this energy core, and it's simply because of the Tesseract. So this all comes down to the Tesseract yet again, another movie where, like, we didn't have Captain America that tied to the Tesseract. Now we have another movie, which is Captain Marvel. Every movie with a captain with it has to have a Tesseract in it. So Carol goes on and is to find that I guess this base might have been powered with the Tesseract, and that Lawson had been keeping this handy. So we find out that Talos is to find his family there of Skrull people who are all refugees that had nowhere else to go but this base, but there was no way for them to send a signal out because the Kree would have found them. And Talos is like, well, it's okay because I found you now. And so that was the real reason why Talos wanted to desperately find that base, was because he wanted to find his Skrull family. So we now go on and have the Kree arrive, and so the Kree is going to imprison the Skrulls so that way the Kree can go on and fight with Carol here, or Captain Marvel here. So Captain Marvel, before the Kree get here, she hands off the Tesseract because Goose, of course, the Frelic, whatever goofy alien thing that it is, the cat ends up swallowing the whole Tesseract with its very octopus-like mouth of sorts, and almost very Groot-like in some ways. So Nick Fury, who was to pet this thing, was to love it, and all this kinds of stuff, he's going on like, oh my god, like, this is what that was? Like, yeah, I'm gonna pick you up now. Like, let's go, Goose. Like, yeah. And he's like, God, like, I've been petting this thing, and I don't even know if it likes it. Like, maybe it hates me secretly. So, because I've been showing it so much love and affection, at some point it's probably going to scratch me in the eye, and I'm going to regret it forever, because the Skrulls are like, yeah, no. whatever. Anyway, the goofiest thing about this movie. So we now have it where Carol is to pretend that the Tesseract is in this Fonzie Happy Days lunchbox. And so now she's going on and wanting to fight every single Kree member, who, of course, at some point was her friend, but is to now turn around, and she's now having to go on and try and take most of them down. We can really just say here that she's not going to go on and kill Karath because Guardians of the Galaxy, but like we can go on and kind of have her take down any number of other characters in a way of which that doesn't seem like they're definitively dead. So now we get a bizarrish moment where we have this jukebox-like thing that is to cue up with this song called I'm Just a Girl by No Doubt. And I'm like, this song does not make sense for a fighting thing, but it's whatever. Whatever just kind of gets you through the night. Because we have it where Yon-Rogg comes in and is to neutralize Captain Marvel's power and is to force her to talk to the Supreme Intelligence. And the Supreme Intelligence the whole time, who is still Lawson, is just like toting about like, man, don't you just love this code? Man, like this music that's playing in the background, it's so great. Like, it feels like none of the dialogue here, like, it's meaningless. Just like, so Captain Marvel is talking to the Supreme Intelligence and just saying that she is gonna, like, she's threatening the Supreme Intelligence, and the Supreme Intelligence is like, no, like we're gonna take your powers away from you. Like, there's no way that you're gonna be powerful enough to take, like, me down. And Carol here is just going and, like, she's like, well, you know what, I've been, like, having my hand tied behind my back the whole time, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to fight that way. So Carol busts out of her, like, power neuralizing thing and is to go on and fully, like, use her ability, and she's consistently glowing to fight off all these Kree members, take them all down. So we now go on and have it where Carol is to go on, and she's already taken down all these Kree guys, and we have a moment where all the Skrull guys are technically disguising themselves as Kree to take down other Kree members, so that way everybody can go on and escape out of this base. So Carol goes on and is, like, the only real fight that she really has to take is her fight with Yon-Rogg on planet Earth. But while that's happening, all of a sudden she is to also be facing Ronan the Accuser's warships. And so Carol is to be so distracted by that, by just having her just go through and just bashing her way through all of these warships, and is to go and take this one missile and is to push the missile to where it explodes all the other missiles, and then she blasts through all these other ships, leaving Ronan to be the only ship left, to where Ronan now has to retreat, saying that he's like, well, like, we're going to come back at some point. And the other guy that's working with Ronan is like, well, for the energy core. And Ronan's like, no, we're going to come back for her. Like, saying that there's possibly going to, at some point, be a Captain Marvel 2. Because we have the fact that Captain Marvel at the very end of this movie is to go off and is to trying to take down, I guess, the Kree Empire in future installments, which never really happens. We just kind of fast forward to what eventually will be Endgame, and that's what really happens at the end of this, where all of a sudden Carol is to show up after the pager is to be used, and Carol is to go on to like, hey, like, where is Fury? And that's one of the end credit scenes. And the other end credit scene, of course, is uh, the goose barfing up the Tesseract. But so now that Captain Marvel is to go back and re-meet up with Young-Rog after taking down all the Accuser warships, now we have it where Young-Rog is like, well, yeah, like, really, you should have the time now where you should beat me without any of those powers, and, like, you should finally be able to just take me out now, just take me on, like, I'm sure you can beat me now, blah, blah, blah. And so we kind of have the Indiana Jones moment where, like, the guy with the swords is doing all these, like, whammadine things. He's, like, flinging all these swords in the air and all this kind of stuff. And then Harrison Ford just comes in with his gun and shoots him in the head and kills him. Same kind of scenario here. Where we just go on and have... Wow, like, Jude Law is really getting into this. Like, yeah, you're going to have to beat me this time around. Hand to hand. You can do it. Yeah. And then Carol just blasts Jude into this rock, and then walks to where he is and tells him, like, yeah, like, I have nothing to prove to you. And so Carol goes and chucks Young-Rog into the ship, and is to tell him to just send the Kree Empire a message that, like, she's coming for them. So, and Young-Rog is like, well, I can't go back there empty-handed. And she's like, well, you're not. You're gonna go there with a message. So Carol sends off Young-Rog's ship to go back to Hala. So now Carol has to turn around and say all of her goodbyes, and is to say that she needs to go off back into space to fight a number of wars that we will probably never see. Because, honestly, if we see a Captain Marvel 2, like, I would much rather there to be, like, a Captain Marvel 2 where we have, like, a civil war with whatever is going on currently, and then maybe they have some flashes of what possibly Danvers was doing, like, while she was gone, or maybe they kind of, like, harpen back on that, where there's some kind of something that ties into whatever is currently going on with whatever happened in XYZ time period while Danvers was technically gone or something. They could have a little thing of that somehow or another. So, because I think it's kind of stupid that they've consistently used Skrulls as these kind of like end story, end credit scene things from a number of shows, to where it's just like, oh, well, this person just so happens to be a Skrull, and now he's going to tell you, or he's going to tell your character where they're going next. And it's like, okay, here. So, hence why we have kind of Monica's story ending the way it does for WandaVision. No spoilers. So, we also had the moment in this movie where Carol is to change her colors from green and white to then going and seeing Monica's shirt, and she's like, like, how about I go on and, like, I just change my suit to just being red, yellow, and blue. And that's how we end up getting the suit, the suit colors. And I'm just like, because of course we don't really have any thought or effort really putting into, like, the way the suit comes about. But it was kind of fun to have, like, the goofy variations of this character's suit, because when really looking at it, Captain Marvel has gone through a number of different iterations through comic books. So, like, to see the variety of different kind of color changing schemes, whatever, I'm sure there's some kind of connection to some book somewhere where it's like, oh yeah, Captain Marvel had this suit at some point in some series of something where they were trying to boost up sales by giving her a different look or something like that. But so, anyways, so yeah, so Danvers says goodbye to everybody. Fury ends up getting scratched in the eye with a cat, leaving him to go on and talk to Coulson. And Coulson was to say, it's like, well, hey, did the Kree really scratch your eye for not giving up information? And Fury is just like, yeah, that's what happened. And so Coulson is to give Fury these glass eye things, which he never really goes with because in future eye patch movies and shows and whatever, we really just see Nick Fury always going with the eye patch. So, yeah. Anyways, that is future of character. That is whatever of future stories. So, with that said, we also have Nick Fury, who was to go on and type up that he wants to put together this Avengers Initiative because Fury is talking to Coulson about how, like, well, hey, we found some hero without even trying. Just, like, think if we were to go on and try to find and scout out all these people, like really how much these people at some point could go on and help us. And so that's all of a sudden how Fury is to kind of see this picture of Carol and see that her nickname was Avenger. And the Avengers Initiative. We have nothing that says that, like, Steve Rogers was the first Avenger. Like, no, we have to retcon this movie and make it to where Carol is just the first Avenger, technically. Whatever. Just whatever with these Marvel films. You guys want to retcon and do whatever you want. Just at the end of the day, just give us a movie that is worthwhile watching. And this one didn't exactly fit that bill. So with that said, I think I'm going to fit my bill by getting out of here. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Captain Marvel, especially after having me have to talk about this whole thing. Nothing was really perfect. I try to go out of my way to not go into the heavy dialogue of things and just kind of ram through a lot of stuff. But yeah, so... Oh, there was also the one moment about the dog tag where the only thing that Maria was to recover from that whole accident after Carol was to have disappeared was the dog tag of like half of a name, where it's just Carol. And we had the one moment where Carol was defiant against the Supreme Intelligence and just telling the Supreme Intelligence that she's no longer Veers, she is Carol. And like those were kind of like interesting moments, just kind of like, oh, okay, so this person is to really like say that she no longer is a part of the Kree and she was an Earth or Terran person all along, and how the Kree went out of their way to deny her that or to not tell her the truth. And she had to go on and find that out while she was on Earth because the Kree had consistently kept this a secret from her. So, with that said, I'm going to go out on my way to just get out of here, call it a day, or call it a day technically to go on and find another movie to watch. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.